Fellas, the UFC roster is massive. There's so many big fighters, so many stars, so many prospects, and I feel like we shouldn't be having these poor Fight Night main events when we've got so many other opportunities we can make for Fight Night main events. Like this month alone, we've got 2 Fight Nights, Lemos versus Jandaroba, Namajunas versus Cortez, and I feel like this year alone we've had so many poor Fight Night main events. I know there's been a few that have been good. UFC Saudi Arabia was really good. We've got an Abu Dhabi event this year, which is really good, but it shouldn't be the case of us only having like 1 or 2, maybe 3 stacked Fight Nights a year. I feel like every single Fight Night we can afford to have like a really good Fight Night because of how many good stars we've got in the UFC. So I've gone through every single weight class and picked at least 3 or 4 big Fight Night main events you can make in the UFC. And I've also put them in front of a venue, so we're not having any Apex events, because I feel like the UFC shouldn't be having these terrible main events. We can't afford to be having these terrible main events when we've got so many opportunities for other fighters to be in a Fight Night main event. So I've gone through every weight class. We'll start in the heavyweight divisions. The first heavyweight Fight Night main event I've got is Ciryl Gane versus Alexander Volkov 2. This happened before, and I feel like the stakes for this fight is even bigger now. It's a really fun fight on the feet between 2 high-level strikers in the heavyweight division. Have it in a main event in Paris. That's an easy UFC Paris event right there for Ciryl Gane. Gane doesn't deserve a title shot just yet because he's he's coming off a win over Spivak, and Alexander Volkov's on a 4-fight winning streak, 3 of them coming by way of finish, 1 of them over Pavlovich. If he can beat Ciryl Gane, let's do Volkov against the winner of Blades and Aspinall. It's a really good fight for both of them, really big opportunity for both of them, fairly 50-50 as of right now. In a main event in Paris, Gane versus Volkov 2, that's a big Fight Night main event. You don't want to do that. Gane versus Almeida, another big Fight Night main event you can make in Paris. Gelton Almeida's been calling for this fight for ages, ever since his win over Romanov. Grappler versus striker. We can see how much Ciryl Gane's grappling is improved when he faces one of the best grapplers in the heavyweight division. Gane versus Almeida, that's another Fight Night main event you can make right there in the UFC in Paris. You don't want to include Ciryl Gane. Sergey Pavlovich versus Gelton Almeida in Brazil. Gelton Almeida's headlined in Brazil before against Derek Lewis. This fight is even bigger. We're not just feeding Sergey Pavlovich to another dangerous striker, we're feeding him to a grappler this time. We can test how good his grappling is against one of the best grappling prospects in Gelton Almeida. And if Almeida can beat Sergey Pavlovich, let's chuck Gelton Almeida in the top 5 of the division. Let's give him a #1 contender fight. Why not? Pavlovich versus Almeida in a main event in Brazil. Spotlight on both of them. That's another really big heavyweight Fight Night main event you can make right there. Nobody wants to see Lewis versus Naski Mentor. So yeah, those are 3 big heavyweight Fight Night main events you can make right there. Light heavyweight division. Yambla Hoit versus Vulcan in Poland. UFC have gone to Poland a few times, and I feel like Yambla Hoit, he's had a bit of a tricky last few fights, and he needs to get back on track. And I feel like a win over Vulcan is the perfect fight to do that, because if Yambla Hoit can beat Uzdemir, he's back in the top 5. He's been calling for a title shot, and a win over Uzdemir would definitely put him close to that shot. And for Vulcan he's just slept Johnny Walker. If he can beat Yambla Hoit on top of that, now we're going to start seeing Vulcan in title talks. We're going to see him around the title pitch. We're going to see him in the top 5. Main event in Poland, Yambla Hoit versus Vulcan That's a really good main event you can make right there. Jamal Hill versus Carlo Soberg. The guy who just main evented UFC 300, taking on one of the biggest prospects in the light heavyweight division. This is a really good Fight Night main event. Hill, Ulberg, almost guaranteed ain't going to the judges' scorecards. It's a big opportunity for Carlo Soberg to beat a big name in Jamal Hill and put himself in the title picture. And for Jamal Hill, if he can beat Carlo Soberg, he's just shut down one of the biggest prospects in the light heavyweight division, and he can start, fighting these contenders again. Hill, Ulberg in some sort of venue in the USA. That's another really big Fight Night main event you can make right there. Yuri Prochazka, the dude who headlined UFC 303, one of the biggest stars in the light heavyweight division. Let's give him a step down in competition against either Nikita, Krylov and Khalil Roundtree. Let him headline a Fight Night in Czech Republic. He's been calling for a Czech Republic event, and if the UFC can get that done, Prochazka versus either Krylov or Roundtree. If Prochazka can beat Krylov or Roundtree, he's straight back into the title picture. Obviously, he's not going to get an immediate title shot or anything like that, but if he can beat one of these guys, really good opportunity for Yuri to get these big fights again. And if either Krylov or Roundtree can beat Yuri, that's a really good win for them, and they can now progress in the light heavyweight division, and we kind of need some more names in the light heavyweight division. So Prochazka against either Nikita Krylov or Khalil Roundtree in some sort of venue in Czech Republic. That's another Fight Night main event you can make right there. And then this Fight Night main event is kind of lower level, but I still feel like it could go. Anthony Smith versus Dominic Reyes. Legend versus legend. Washed guy versus washed guy. At least one of them are getting a win. Reyes is just co-main evented a fight night and won. Smith has been the featured fight for 2 pay-per-views in a row now. I think this probably could go as a fight night main event in some sort of venue. At least one of them are winning. They were both at the top of the light heavyweight division one time. Now both of them are kind of in a weird spot. Either Reyes is going to be on a winning streak, which I don't think anyone expected, or Smith can finally win another fight outside of Petrino. Smith and Reyes in some sort of event in the USA. Let's do that fight night main event right there. And then the middleweight division. Ikram Aliskerov versus Roman Kopilov. Now, I know we have got a fight night main event in Abu Dhabi and a pay-per-view in Abu Dhabi this year, but if they can have another fight night in Abu Dhabi, why not? Ikram Aliskerov versus Roman Kopilov. Ikram Aliskerov just headlined a fight night against Robert Whitaker. Needs to step down in competition. Let's give him Roman Kopilov. It's not a ranked guy that he's fighting, but it is one of the best unranked guys in the middleweight division. It's a really fun fight between the two of them, and I think the winner of this fight could potentially get ranked in the middleweight division. That's a really good fight night main event. I would not complain if that was announced as a fight night main event. 2 big Russian prospects in Abu Dhabi as a main event. Ikram Aliskerov versus Roman Kopilov. Now we can go to Brazil. Paulo Costa versus Michel Pereira in some sort of fight night main event in Brazil. You've got a Brazilian fighter versus a Brazilian fighter. Michel Pereira's put together a few wins. He's a really big prospect in the middleweight division. And if he can beat Paulo Costa, that's going to put Michel Pereira against those other guys in the top 5, which is... that'll be so interesting to see. And for Paulo Costa, he's already lost to a lot of these guys in the top 5 and the higher end of the middleweight division. He doesn't deserve to fight another one of these top guys. He should have to fight an up-and-comer. So if he can beat Michel Pereira, he's beating that up-and-comer, and then we can start seeing Costa against these top guys again. Let's have that in a fight night main event in Brazil. Costa versus Michel Pereira. I'm not complaining if that gets announced. Marvin Vettori versus Caio Braulo in Brazil as well. Caio Braulo, one of the biggest prospects in the middleweight division right now. He's strung together a lot of good wins. He just KO'd Paul Craig at UFC 301. I'm sure he's wanting a big fight to get his name out there. And in a main event with all the spotlight, he's facing Marvin Vettori. And Vettori's been out for over a year. This dude's last fight was against Jared Cannonier in like June or whatever it was in 2023. And he got battered by Cannonier. He hasn't fought in so long. It's a good opportunity for Caio Braulo to get in the top 5 if he beats Vettori. And it's another chance for Vettori to shut down the prospect of Caio Braulo in enemy territory. Do that in a Brazilian main event. Caio Braulo, Marvin Vettori. Really good fight night main event right there. Welterweight division. Stephen Thompson versus MVP in London. We've had a couple of UFC Londons across the years, and I think MVP should be in the UK for his next event. He's fought twice in the UFC. Neither of them had been in the UK. Let's give him all the spotlight in a main event in a fight night in the UK. UFC London, Thompson versus Page. That is such a good fight night main event right there. Super interesting striking matchup between two of some of the best strikers in the welterweight division right there. Big opportunities for both of them. Really fun fight as a main event in London to get MVP in the UK market. And if Stephen Thompson's unavailable, MVP versus Jeff Neal. Another really big fight night main event you can make at UFC London. I think this will be a really fun fight. It's either going to be Jeff Neal outboxing and piecing up MVP, or it's going to be MVP dancing on Jeff Neal in London. So those are some really big fight night main events you can make in the welterweight division. And then we can have a #1 contender fight. Let's go to Australia for a fight night. Jack Delmar against Ian Garry, a #1 contender fight. Winner faces it for the belt after Shafkat. This is a really fun fight because if Ian Garry can beat JDM in enemy territory, he's going to be one of the biggest villains in the welterweight division. He's going to be playing heel, and he would have deserved the title shot if he could beat JDM as well. That would be his best win by far. But if JDM can beat the brakes off Ian Garry in Australia, he's going to become a fan favourite, and he would have deserved the title shot as well. I think this is a really, really interesting fight. JDM, Ian Garry, both of these guys undefeated in the UFC. Main event in some sort of venue in Australia in the welterweight division. That's another fight night main event you can make in the welterweight division. The lightweight division. Let's go to Paris. UFC Paris, another event in Paris. Benoit Saint-Denis versus Dan Hooker. Another really good fight night main event you can make. Benoit Saint-Denis needs to step down in competition after he got KO'd by Dustin Poirier. Let him face a former opponent of Poirier in Dan Hooker, who's coming off a win over Jalin Turner. If Benoit Saint-Denis can beat Dan Hooker, then we can start seeing him against more of the guys in the top 10. And if Dan Hooker can beat Benoit Saint-Denis, same thing for him. He would have been on a 2-fight winning streak, and he can get some wins. He can string together some wins in the top 10 as well. So Hooker versus Saint-Denis in a Paris main event. That's another really big fight. If Dan Hooker don't want to do that, let's have Money Moicano versus Saint-Denis. Money Moicano's last win was also Jalin Turner. Another really fun fight between Renato Moicano and Benoit Saint-Denis in a main event in Paris. Big opportunity for both of them. Really fun fight right there. And that's another big fight night main event you can make in the lightweight division. And you can already see that we don't need to be having slop as fight night main events. So we've even got another one in the lightweight division in Australia. Dan Hooker's hometown now as well, or home country, whatever. Dan Hooker versus Rafael FV. Both of these guys returning after an injury. It'll be a bloody fight. It'll be a really fun fight night main event. Woody can stay in the top 10 or at least progress in the top 10. Hooker versus FV in Australia. Really good fight night main event right there. And it's not in front of the Apex as well, which nobody wants. That's another good fight night you can make. Featherweight division. Diego Lopez versus Brian Ortega. Let's reschedule this fight. Obviously, it was supposed to be the core main event of UFC 303. Let's see it again. Big opportunity for Diego Lopez. If he can beat Brian Ortega in Brazil, in front of all the spotlight in a main event, I'd argue that he deserves a title shot from that. And if Brian Ortega can go to Brazil and beat Diego Lopez, that would have meant Brian Ortega would have beaten 2 guys in a row in enemy territory. And let's give Brian Ortega that title shot in Brazil. Lopez versus Ortega, big fight night main event. If Ortega don't want to do that, let's have Yair Rodriguez versus Diego Lopez as a main event in Brazil. Another big opportunity for Diego Lopez. Nothing's changed. It's only the opponent. On the feet, this would be such a fun fight to make as a fight night main event. And we can also see how good Yair Rodriguez's grappling has improved since that fight with Diego Lopez and Volkanovski, because he is known for being one of the worst grapplers in the featherweight division. Rodriguez, Lopez, main event in Brazil. Why not? Who says no? That's a really big opportunity for Lopez as well. And another big fight in the featherweight division. Aljamain Sterling, a former champion, versus undefeated Movsar Evloev in some sort of venue in the USA. Let's have that as a fight night main event. These guys have been calling each other out on Twitter. I think the winner of this fight could arguably call for a title shot as well. You've got undefeated Movsar Evloev. If he can beat a former champion in Aljamain Sterling, that's a really big win for him in a fight night main event. And if Sterling can shut down the undefeated prospect, which is Movsar Evloev, that's a big win for Sterling. And I would argue that he deserves a title shot from that. Sterling versus Evloev in a main event in the USA, in some sort of fight night main event. In the bantamweight division, let's go to China. The UFC keep hinting that they're going to China, and then they never do. Let's actually go to China. Song Yudong versus Mario Bautista. 2 ranked bantamweights. I think this is a guaranteed finish. 2 guys who walk forward, throw it down in China in a main event to get Song Yudong's name out there. Really good opportunity for both of them in a fight night main event, rather than just chucking it in the Apex. That's one fight you can make in the bantamweight division. And now we've got a really, really big fight. I don't know if this is too good to be out on a fight night, but Jose Aldo versus Dominic Cruz in a main event of a fight night. Dominic Cruz just main evented it. Well, didn't just main event, but his last fight was a main event in a fight night against Marlon Vera. Got KO'd out stiff. What better comeback fight than Jose Aldo, legend versus legend, in a main event in Brazil, in Jose Aldo's hometown. I don't know if he's selling down. I think it's from Rio de Janeiro. But you know what I'm trying to say. Aldo versus Cruz. Massive, massive main event in the bantamweight division. This would be huge, even just for a fight night. And we can do a title fight as well. Pennington versus Kayla Harrison. No one wants to see this as a main event for a pay-per-view, or no one wants to see this on a pay-per-view. And I feel like women's title fights kind of deserve to be on a fight night, because they're getting spotlight, but at the same time they're not going to get the hate because they're not having to do it on pay-per-view. Pennington versus Harrison in some sort of event in USA or Canada. I think I want to see Harrison face for the belt next. I don't want to see Pena face for the title next. I want to see Kayla Harrison get a title shot, because I think she would manhandle Pennington. Main event for a fight night in USA or Canada. That's the bantamweight division. Fight in the flyweight division. Japan, Tatsuro Taira versus Brandon Moreno. Tatsuro Taira is one of the best grapplers and one of the best prospects in the flyweight division. Him taking on a former champion against Brandon Moreno would be a really big opportunity in Japan as well, in his home country. Japan's UFC market is growing in the UFC. Let's do this, man. Taira versus Moreno. Main event in Japan. That's an easy fight night main event you can make right there. Amir Albazi versus Brandon Moreno. Not Brandon Moreno. Brandon Royval. That's another big fight night main event you can make right there, rather than just chucking it in the Apex. That is a #1 contender fight as well. I think the winner of this fight could also deserve a title shot in the flyweight division, because obviously Royval's got that win over Moreno. Albazi's got the win over Kaio France. Put them against each other. Winner gets a title shot in a main event of a USA venue somewhere. And then another one you can make, another title fight for the women. Alexa Grasso versus Valentina Shevchenko 3. They're the coaches of the Ultimate Fighter. If they're going to run it back a third time, let's go back to Mexico. Grasso versus Shevchenko. Get them against each other in a UFC Mexico fight night. And that is another main event. That's another fight night main event right there. So you can just see, I have got an absolute massive list of all the fight night potential main events you can make. And I know there's going to be people saying, well, if they use all these stacked fighters on fight night main events, what are they going to do for pay-per-views? Assuming that there's, 3 fight night main events in a month and then 1 pay-per-view, you could literally choose 3 of any any of them on this list. You could use, I don't know, Rodriguez versus Lopez. You could do Madalena versus Gary's the next one. You could do Gon versus Volkov is the other one. You only have to choose 3 fights off this list, and that is a month's worth of stacked fight nights right there. And then the rest of the guys on this list, put some of them in a pay-per-view. And that's only, I haven't even included any stars, like mega stars on this list as well. So I don't think the UFC need to be doing these terrible fight nights, and I've just proved it in this video. There's so many potential fight night main events you can make. We don't need to be getting fed slop, and the UFC need to do something about it. That's my little rant about UFC fight nights over. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.